The flame flickers in the wind of time, threatening to die out forever. But here, in the Ember Chronicles, we refuse to let the past become ash. I'm your Chronicle Keeper, and tonight, we're breathing life back into a story that has puzzled investigators for over a century. This is Chronicle number 1, The Last Lighthouse Keeper. But before we fan these embers back to life, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because some truths only burn bright when shared with others. And if you enjoy deep historical investigations, consider joining our Flame Keepers on Patreon for exclusive content and early access to Chronicles. Your support helps us conduct the extensive research that brings these forgotten stories to light. Now, let's begin our journey to December 1900 and the remote Flannan Isles, where 3 men vanished without a trace, leaving behind one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. On December 15, 1900, the steamship Hesperus cut through the grey waters of the North Atlantic. Approaching the Flannan Isles lighthouse off the rugged coast of Scotland, Captain James Harvey had made this supply run dozens of times before. Threading his vessel through the treacherous channels between the Seven Hunters, as these islands were known to local sailors, he knew the rhythm of this place intimately. The predictable beacon that cut through winter storms like a sword through darkness. The precise timing of the lighthouse's distinctive signal, the routine patterns of life at Britain's most isolated lighthouse station. But on this approach, something was fundamentally wrong. The lighthouse was dark. For 3 days and nights, the most remote lighthouse in Scotland had been silent. No light to guide ships through the treacherous waters, where countless vessels had met their doom on hidden reefs and jagged rocks. No signal that the 3 lighthouse keepers were alive and well, maintaining their vigilant watch over one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the British Isles. Captain Harvey ordered his crew to prepare a landing boat, though the rough seas made such an approach treacherous, even for experienced seamen. Someone had to find out what had happened to the men of Flannan Isles. The Flannan Isles, also known as the Seven Hunters, lie 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis in Scotland's Outer Hebrides. These 7 small islands rise from the North Atlantic like ancient sentinels, their towering cliffs battered relentlessly by some of the most violent seas in the world. The largest island, Eilean Mor, barely spans 500 yards at its widest point, a desolate outcrop of weathered rock that seems to challenge the very concept of human habitation. It was here, on this seemingly impossible perch above the churning Atlantic, that the Northern Lighthouse Board had chosen to construct what would become one of Scotland's most isolated and strategically crucial lighthouses. The decision to build a lighthouse on Eilean Mor was not made lightly. For centuries, the waters around the Flannan Isles had claimed ships with horrifying regularity. The combination of fierce Atlantic storms, hidden reefs, and powerful currents created a maritime graveyard that had earned the respect and fear of sailors throughout the North Atlantic. Ships bound for Scotland from America, Iceland, and the northern European ports had to navigate these waters, and too many never completed their journeys. The wreckage scattered along the shores of the Outer Hebrides told the story of countless tragedies, each representing lives lost to the unforgiving sea. By the late 19th century, the increasing volume of maritime traffic made the construction of a lighthouse not just advisable but essential. Steam-powered vessels were becoming more common, but they remained vulnerable to the natural hazards that had claimed sailing ships for generations. The Northern Lighthouse Board, responsible for navigation aids throughout Scotland, recognized that a lighthouse on the Flannan Isles could save countless lives and protect valuable cargo from destruction. The challenge lay in building and maintaining such a facility in one of the most hostile environments imaginable. Construction began in 1895 under the supervision of David Allen Stevenson, a member of the famous Stevenson family who had designed lighthouses throughout Scotland for 3 generations. The Stevensons were legendary in lighthouse engineering circles, having created some of the most challenging and innovative lighthouse projects in the world. David's great-grandfather, Robert Stevenson, had built the Bell Rock Lighthouse, considered one of the engineering marvels of the 19th century. His grandfather, Alan Stevenson, had constructed the magnificent Skerryvore Lighthouse on a remote reef off the Scottish coast. David came from a family that understood both the technical challenges and the human costs of lighthouse construction in extreme environments. The Flannan Isles project represented unique challenges even by Stevenson family standards. Every piece of equipment, every building material, every tool and supply had to be transported by ship across 20 miles of often violent ocean, then somehow transferred to an island with no harbor, no beach and cliffs that rose 75 feet straight up from the water. Workers had to be ferried to the island in small boats that could be launched only during brief periods of calm weather. Their supplies were hauled up the cliff face by hand-operated winches, a process that was dangerous in good weather and impossible during storms. The logistics of the construction project was staggering. The lighthouse required massive foundation stones, each weighing several tons, that had to be cut to precise specifications on the mainland, transported by ship, and somehow lifted to the construction site. The delicate lens assemblies, manufactured in Paris by the renowned Fresnel company, represented some of the most advanced optical technology of the era. These priceless instruments had to survive not only the ocean crossing but also the precarious transfer from ship to island in conditions that would challenge modern equipment. The lighthouse itself, when finally completed, stood as a testament to Victorian engineering ambition and skill. Rising 75 feet above the island's highest point, the tower was constructed of local stone supplemented by specially selected granite brought from quarries on the Scottish mainland. The foundation went deep into the bedrock, anchored with iron bolts and sealed with the finest masonry techniques available. The structure was designed to withstand winds of extraordinary force and waves that could, under extreme conditions, reach heights that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The light itself was a marvel of precision engineering. The lens system, manufactured in Paris according to the revolutionary designs of Augustin Fresnel, used a complex arrangement of prisms and mirrors to focus the lighthouse S-beam into a concentrated ray visible for 24 nautical miles in clear weather. The rotating mechanism that created the lighthouse's distinctive flash pattern was a masterpiece of clockwork precision, requiring regular winding but capable of maintaining perfect timing for hours at a time. The signature pattern of 2 white flashes every 30 seconds was unique to Flannan Isles, allowing ships to identify their exact position even in the worst weather conditions. But it was the lighthouse keeper's quarters that truly revealed the isolation and hardship of this posting. Built into the base of the lighthouse structure, the living spaces were designed for functionality rather than comfort. 3 small bedrooms, each barely large enough for a single bed, and a few personal belongings, were supplemented by a common room that served as both dining area and recreation space. The kitchen was equipped with a cast iron stove and basic cooking facilities, while storage areas held supplies that had to last 4 weeks between supply ship visits. The quarters included a small library, stocked with books, chosen specifically for men who would spend months at a time with no entertainment beyond their own resources. Technical manuals for lighthouse maintenance occupied one shelf, while another held works of literature, philosophy, and science, intended to keep active minds engaged during the long, dark months of Scottish winter. A chess set, playing cards, and writing materials completed the modest amenities available to men facing one of the most psychologically demanding jobs in the British Isles. The Northern Lighthouse Board had developed strict protocols for manning their remote stations, protocols born from decades of experience with the unique challenges of lighthouse operation. 3 keepers were assigned to each lighthouse, ensuring that someone was always on duty while others rested. They rotated shifts throughout the day and night in a carefully choreographed schedule that ensured the light never failed. 1 man maintained watch in the lighthouse itself, monitoring the beacon and weather conditions, while another handled maintenance tasks and the 3rd rested or attended to domestic duties every 4 to 6 weeks. Depending on weather conditions and the availability of supply ships, a relief keeper would arrive to replace one of the 3 permanent staff members. This rotation system allowed each keeper to return to the mainland for leave, maintaining contact with families and civilization, while ensuring that the lighthouse remained fully operational. The relief system was crucial for mental health as well as practical operations, providing the psychological break that made long-term service at remote stations bearable. Communication with the outside world was limited but carefully maintained. Each lighthouse was equipped with signal equipment that allowed keepers to communicate with passing ships and, when atmospheric conditions permitted, with other lighthouses and signal stations along the coast. Daily weather observations were recorded meticulously, contributing to the growing understanding of maritime meteorology that was crucial for improving navigation safety. Equipment status reports, supply needs, and personal messages were all transmitted according to strict schedules that allowed the Northern Lighthouse Board to monitor the condition and morale of their remote personnel. On December 7th, exactly 1 year before our story begins, the Flannan Isles lighthouse officially began operation. The ceremony was modest, attended by representatives of the Northern Lighthouse Board and a few invited guests, who had made the challenging journey to witness the lighting of Scotland's newest navigation aid. The first illumination of the beacon marked the culmination of 4 years of dangerous and expensive construction work, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in the story of maritime safety in the North Atlantic. The first 3 keepers assigned to Flannan Isles were chosen specifically for their experience and psychological stability. The Northern Lighthouse Board understood that manning such an isolated station required men of exceptional character, individuals who could handle not only the technical demands of lighthouse operation, but also the psychological pressures of extreme isolation. These men had to be self-reliant and capable of working effectively as part of a small team for extended periods without external supervision. For 11 months, the lighthouse operated without incident. Supply ships arrived on schedule, navigating the treacherous waters around the Seven Hunters with a skill that came from years of experience in these dangerous seas. Relief keepers rotated as planned, bringing news from the mainland and taking messages back to families and loved ones. The beacon flashed its distinctive pattern every night, guiding vessels safely through the treacherous waters around the Flannan Isles, and contributing to a measurable reduction in shipping casualties in this historically dangerous area. The system worked exactly as the Northern Lighthouse Board had designed it to work, a testament to careful planning and the dedication of experienced lighthouse personnel. Reports from the station were consistently positive, with keepers noting the quality of the equipment, the adequacy of their supplies, and their success in maintaining the crucial beacon that ships depended upon for safe navigation. By December 1900, the 3 keepers stationed at Flannan Isles were James Dick, Thomas Marshall, and Donald Macabre. These were not novices hastily assigned to a difficult posting, but experienced professionals with decades of combined service in the lighthouse system. Each man brought specific skills and experience that made him valuable, not just as an individual keeper, but as part of the carefully balanced team required for successful operation of such an isolated station. James Ducat served as principal keeper, the senior man responsible for overall operation of the lighthouse and the welfare of his colleagues. At 43 years old, Ducat was a veteran of over 20 years in the lighthouse service, having worked at stations throughout Scotland and earning a reputation as one of the most reliable and competent keepers in the Northern Lighthouse Board's employ. Colleagues described him as unflappable under pressure, methodical in his approach to both routine duties and emergency situations, and possessed of the quiet leadership qualities essential for maintaining morale and discipline in isolated conditions. Ducat's wife, who had endured the separations and uncertainties that came with lighthouse service for 2 decades, described her husband as a man who could handle any crisis with calm determination. His personal logs from previous postings preserved in the Northern Lighthouse Board archives reveal a keeper who took pride in perfect maintenance of equipment, accurate recording of weather and maritime observations, and the safety of vessels that depended on his vigilance. He was known for his ability to perform complex repairs with limited resources, a crucial skill for keepers who might wait weeks for replacement parts or technical assistance. Thomas Marshall served as first assistant, a position that required both technical expertise and the ability to assume command in the principal keeper's absence. At 38 years old, Martial was nearly as experienced as Ducat, having worked at several lighthouse stations throughout Scotland's island chains. His personnel files, meticulously maintained by the Northern Lighthouse Board, documented a career marked by exceptional attention to detail and absolute reliability in the performance of duties that literally meant the difference between life and death for navigating Scotland's treacherous waters. Marshall had earned particular recognition for his maintenance of lighthouse logs, the detailed records that documented everything from weather conditions to equipment performance to the movements of ships in the area. His handwriting was precise and clear, his observations accurate and complete, and his technical notes had been used by lighthouse engineers to improve equipment and procedures throughout the system. Colleagues respected his methodical approach to complex tasks and his ability to maintain equipment to standards that exceeded even the Northern Lighthouse Board's exacting requirements. Beyond his technical skills, Marshall was known for his steady temperament and reliability in crisis situations. During a severe storm at his previous posting, he had maintained the lighthouse beacon for 36 consecutive hours, when equipment failures and extreme weather threatened to extinguish the light. His detailed report of that incident had led to improvements in backup systems that were subsequently implemented throughout the lighthouse system. Donald MacArthur was the second assistant, the youngest of the three at 28 years old, but already a veteran of multiple lighthouse postings. Despite his relative youth, MacArthur had accumulated impressive experience and earned the respect of colleagues throughout the lighthouse service. His quick thinking and steady nerves had been demonstrated repeatedly in emergency situations, while his cheerful disposition made him a valuable asset for maintaining morale during the long, dark months of Scottish winter when psychological pressures could overwhelm even experienced keepers. MacArthur's background included service at 3 different lighthouse stations, each presenting unique challenges that had contributed to his professional development. At his first posting, a coastal lighthouse subject to frequent equipment failures, he had learned to diagnose and repair complex mechanical problems with limited tools and resources. His second assignment, at a remote island station similar to Flannan Isles, had taught him the psychological coping strategies essential for extended isolation. His most recent posting had involved training new keepers, experience that had developed his communication skills and deepened his understanding of lighthouse operations. Personnel evaluations consistently praised MacArthur's ability to maintain optimism and humor even under difficult conditions. Lighthouse keeping could be a psychologically demanding profession, particularly at remote stations where men might go weeks without seeing another human face beyond their immediate colleagues. The ability to maintain team morale and diffuse tensions before they escalated into serious problems was considered almost as important as technical competence in lighthouse operations. These 3 men represented the best of the lighthouse service, experienced, competent, psychologically stable, and committed to the crucial work of maritime safety. They understood the weight of their responsibility and the lives that depended on their vigilance. They had families, futures, and every reason to return safely to the mainland when their tours of duty were completed. The idea that such men would abandon their post voluntarily was almost inconceivable to those who knew them, understood the culture of dedication that characterized the lighthouse service. Yet by December 15th, 1900, all 3 had vanished completely, leaving behind a mystery that would puzzle investigators for more than a century and capture the imagination of people around the world. Their disappearance would challenge everything that the Northern Lighthouse Board thought it understood about lighthouse operations and human behavior. Under extreme conditions, the last scheduled communication from Flannan Isles Lighthouse came on December 13th, transmitted according to the established protocols that governed lighthouse operations throughout Scotland. Joseph Moore, a relief keeper waiting on the Isle of Lewis for transport to the lighthouse, reported receiving the routine signal at the appointed time. The communication followed standard format, indicating that the lighthouse was operational, the keepers were at their posts, and no immediate assistance was required. Weather conditions were noted as rough, but not unusually severe for December in the Hebrides, where winter storms were a constant presence that experienced keepers learned to manage as part of their routine duties. The signal equipment used for lighthouse communications was reliable, but limited in range and clarity. Messages were transmitted using a combination of lamp signals and, when atmospheric conditions permitted, primitive radio equipment that required considerable skill to operate effectively. The brevity of lighthouse communications was dictated by these technical limitations, rather than any reluctance to share information. Keepers were trained to convey essential information as concisely as possible, focusing on operational status, weather conditions, and any unusual circumstances that might affect navigation or require assistance from shore. December 13th marked the end of routine communications from Flannan Isles. The silence that followed would initially be attributed to equipment failure or atmospheric conditions that interfered with signal transmission, both common occurrences during winter storms in the North Atlantic. It was only when the silence extended beyond normal parameters that concern began to develop among officials responsible for lighthouse operations. On December 14th, ships passing through the area began reporting that the Flannan Isles light was not visible. Captain Holman of the steamship Arctur noted in his shipper's log that he had observed no beacon during the night of December 13th to 14th, despite clear weather conditions that should have made the lighthouse easily visible from his position several miles to the south. As an experienced mariner familiar with the waters around the Hebrides, Captain Holman understood the importance of the Isles light for safe navigation and was concerned enough to record his observations in detail. Captain Holman's initial assumption was that the lighthouse was experiencing mechanical problems with its rotating lens mechanism, a not uncommon occurrence during winter storms, when ice formation and extreme winds could interfere with delicate clockwork mechanisms. Lighthouse keepers were trained to perform most repairs themselves, but complex mechanical problems sometimes required parts or expertise that were not available on remote stations. The captain expected that the light would be restored once repairs were completed, or relief personnel arrived with necessary equipment. However, as December 14th progressed into December 15th, additional ships reported the continued absence of the Flannan Isles beacon. The steamship Hesperus, under Captain James Harvey, was among several vessels that noted the missing light in their navigation logs. For mariners accustomed to using the distinctive flash pattern of the Flannan Isles lighthouse for precise position fixing, its absence created genuine navigation difficulties and safety concerns. By December 15th, the absence of the lighthouse beacon had been reported by multiple vessels, and the cumulative weight of these reports convinced officials that something more serious than routine mechanical failure was involved. The steamer, Hesperus, under Captain Harvey, was dispatched to investigate, carrying supplies and personnel for what was expected to be a routine maintenance visit to address whatever problems had caused the lighthouse to go dark. Captain Harvey was an experienced master mariner who had made supply runs to remote lighthouse stations throughout the Scottish Islands for more than a decade. He understood the challenges of lighthouse operations and the various mechanical and human factors that could cause temporary interruptions in service. His expectation was that he would find keepers struggling with equipment failure during difficult weather conditions, a scenario he had encountered numerous times in his career. At worst, he might find that one of the keepers had been injured or become ill, requiring medical evacuation and temporary replacement until full staffing could be restored. What Captain Harvey found when the Hesperus arrived at Flannan Isles defied all his experience and challenged everything he thought. He understood about lighthouse operations and human behavior under extreme conditions. The search of the lighthouse quarters revealed a scene that puzzled more profoundly and would later perplex investigators for decades. Everything suggested normal daily life, interrupted suddenly and without warning. Beds were unmade but showed no signs of struggle or hasty departure. Personal belongings remained in their usual places, with clothes hanging in wardrobes, books lying open on tables where they had been set aside, and pipes sitting in ashtrays with tobacco still unburned in their bowls. The scene suggested men who had expected to return shortly to continue their normal routines, yet they had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. Kitchen items were clean and properly stored according to lighthouse regulations, which required that all equipment be maintained in perfect condition at all times. Oil lamps were filled with fuel and ready to be lit for evening illumination, their wicks trimmed and their glass chimneys polished to the standards that lighthouse inspectors expected during routine visits. Everything indicated that the keepers had been maintaining their duties conscientiously right up until the moment of their disappearance. The lighthouse log, the detailed record that documented every aspect of station operations, was up to date through December 3rd. Donald MacArthur's entries, written in his characteristic neat handwriting, recorded routine observations about weather conditions, equipment status, and the passage of ships through the area. His final entry, noted at the bottom of the December 13th page, read storm ended, sea calm, guard is over all. The entry suggested that rough weather had passed and conditions were improving, hardly the circumstances under which experienced keepers would risk dangerous outdoor activities. Moore found no farewell note, no explanation for the keeper's absence, and no indication that they had planned to leave the lighthouse for any reason. Their heavy weather gear hung in its designated place in the entrance hall, suggesting that they had not dressed for outdoor work in rough conditions when whatever happened to them occurred. This detail would later become crucial in evaluating theories about their disappearance, as experienced keepers would never venture outside during dangerous weather without proper protective clothing. Most mysteriously, The kitchen clock had stopped at a time that suggested interruption during normal daytime activities. The clock was a reliable timepiece that required daily winding, and its stopped condition indicated that no one had been present to maintain it for at least 24 hours. The time showing on the clock face corresponded with afternoon hours, when keepers would typically be engaged in routine maintenance tasks or meal preparation, activities that would not normally require all 3 men to leave the lighthouse simultaneously. Captain Harvey joined the search when Moore's initial investigation revealed the absence of the keepers. Harvey brought additional crew members to examine every corner of the small compound, looking for clues that might explain what had happened to 3 experienced men who had simply vanished, without leaving any trace of their departure. The expanded search confirmed Moore's initial findings. The lighthouse was in perfect working order, supplies were adequate, and all equipment functioned normally. Yet the men responsible for operating this crucial navigation aid had disappeared completely. The search of the lighthouse building was thorough and systematic. Every room was examined carefully, every storage area was inspected, and every piece of equipment was checked for signs of damage or malfunction. The lighthouse tower itself was climbed and examined, with particular attention paid to the beacon mechanism and the external platforms, where keepers performed routine maintenance tasks. No evidence of accident, struggle, or hasty departure was found anywhere in the structure. The compound's immediate surroundings were also searched methodically. The small areas of level ground around the lighthouse building were examined for footprints, dropped objects, or any other signs that might indicate what direction the keepers had taken when they left. The search revealed nothing unusual beyond the normal wear patterns that would be expected around a building occupied by 3 men. For several months, Captain Harvey's crew was experienced in lighthouse operations and familiar with the various emergencies and problems that could affect remote stations. They understood what to look for and knew the significance of various clues that might not be obvious to casual observers. Their failure to find any evidence of the keeper's fate was particularly troubling, because it suggested that whatever had happened was unlike any situation they had previously encountered in their collective decades of experience with lighthouse operations. The search was expanded to cover the entire island of Eilean Mor, though the small size of the island made it unlikely that 3 grown men could remain hidden anywhere on its rocky surface. The crew systematically examined the coastline, looking for signs that the keepers had attempted to leave by boat or had fallen victim to accident near the water. They searched every cave, every sheltered area, and every spot where men might have sought refuge from storms or other dangers. The rocky coastline of Eilean Mor offered numerous places where accident victims might have fallen or where evidence of mishap might be found. The searchers paid particular attention to the base of cliffs and to tidal pools where objects washed from the sea might have been deposited. They found no overturned boats, no equipment scattered by waves, and no personal belongings that might indicate what had befallen the missing keepers. The western side of the island showed signs of recent storm damage that would later become significant in theories about the keepers' disappearance. Several large boulders had been displaced from their original positions, apparently by waves of extraordinary size and power. A storage box that was normally kept well above the reach of even the highest tides was found damaged and empty, its contents scattered or washed away entirely. The iron railings that protected a section of walkway near the cliff edge had been bent and twisted, apparently by tremendous force. This storm damage was consistent with the kind of extraordinarily violent weather that could generate waves powerful enough to reach heights of 80 feet or more above normal sea level. However, the damage seemed disproportionate to the weather conditions that had been reported in the area during the days leading up to the disappearance. Weather records from surrounding areas showed rough but not exceptional conditions during the critical period, creating a puzzling discrepancy between the physical evidence found on the island and the meteorological data available to investigators. Local fishermen and mariners, when questioned later by investigators, reported that weather conditions during the critical period had been rough but not unusually severe for December in the Hebrides. None had observed the kind of massive swells that would be necessary to cause the type of damage found on Eilean Mor's western cliffs. This contradiction between physical evidence and eyewitness accounts would become one of the most puzzling aspects of the entire case. The search continued for several hours, with every accessible part of the island examined carefully by men who understood what they were looking for and appreciated the significance of what they were not finding. The complete absence of any trace of 3 grown men on a small island with nowhere to hide was unprecedented in the experience of everyone involved in the search operation. After exhausting all possibilities for finding the missing keepers or determining their fate, Captain Harvey made the difficult decision to restore the lighthouse to operation and return to the mainland with news of the disappearance. The beacon at Flannan Isles was too important for navigation safety to remain dark while searches continued, and the evidence clearly indicated that the missing keepers were not on the island and could not be aided by further searching. Joseph Moore volunteered to remain at the lighthouse with 2 other men until a full investigation could be launched and permanent replacements could be assigned. This decision required considerable courage, as the unexplained disappearance of the previous keepers had created an atmosphere of unease and uncertainty that would have been understandable if it had deterred volunteers from remaining at the station. The lighthouse beacon was lit on the evening of December 5th, restoring the crucial navigation aid that ships depended upon for safe passage through the dangerous waters around the Flannan Isles. The restoration of the light marked the end of the immediate crisis for maritime navigation, but it also marked the beginning of an investigation into one of the most baffling disappearances in maritime history. Word of the disappearance reached the Northern Lighthouse Board headquarters in Edinburgh within days of Captain Harvey's return to the mainland. The Board's officials immediately recognized that they were dealing with an unprecedented situation that could have implications far beyond the immediate tragedy of 3 lost lives. The complete disappearance of experienced lighthouse keepers from a secure station raised fundamental questions about lighthouse security, safety procedures, and the adequacy of existing protocols for protecting personnel at remote locations. The Northern Lighthouse Board immediately dispatched Superintendent Robert Moorhead to conduct a comprehensive investigation into the disappearance. Muirhead was a senior administrator with decades of experience in lighthouse operations and personnel management. He had dealt with various accidents, equipment failures, and personnel problems throughout his career, but he had never encountered anything comparable to the complete disappearance of an entire lighthouse crew without leaving any trace of their fate. Muirhead's investigation would be the most thorough examination possible given the technology and forensic techniques available in 1900. His team included experienced lighthouse inspectors, marine engineers familiar with the unique challenges of island lighthouse operations, and administrators who understood the human factors that affected lighthouse personnel. The investigation would be conducted according to the highest standards of the era, with every detail documented and every possible explanation explored systematically. The investigation began with a complete examination of the lighthouse structure and equipment. Muirhead's team inspected every component of the lighthouse mechanism, from the Fresnel lens assembly to the clockwork rotation mechanism to the oil-burning system that provided illumination. They found everything in perfect working order, maintained to standards that exceeded even the Northern Lighthouse Board's exacting requirements. There was no evidence of equipment failure, accident, or any technical problem that might have required the attention of all 3 keepers simultaneously. The living quarters were examined with equal every room was photographed and documented, every personal belonging was catalogued, and every detail was recorded for later analysis. The investigation confirmed Moore's initial observations. Everything suggested normal daily life interrupted suddenly and without warning. The absence of any signs of struggle, hasty departure, or emergency evacuation was particularly puzzling to investigators who had experience with various types of lighthouse accidents and emergencies. Muirhead's team paid particular attention to the lighthouse log and the various records that documented station operations. The log entries were consistent with normal lighthouse routine up until December 13th, showing no indication of problems, concerns, or unusual circumstances that might have preceded the disappearance. The handwriting in the final entries appeared normal, with no signs of stress or urgency that might suggest the writers were aware of impending danger. The weather records maintained by the lighthouse keepers were compared with meteorological data from other stations throughout the region. This comparison revealed the puzzling discrepancy between the storm damage found on the western side of Moore and the relatively moderate weather conditions reported by other observers during the critical period. The investigators could find no satisfactory explanation for how such severe damage could have occurred during weather that was rough, but not exceptional by the standards of the North Atlantic in winter. Moorhead interviewed every person who had recent contact with the Flannan Isles lighthouse or its personnel. Supply ship captains provided detailed accounts of their most recent visits to the station. Relief keepers described their interactions with the missing men, and telegraph operators reported on their communications with the lighthouse. These interviews painted a consistent picture of normal operations and normal behavior right up until the moment the lighthouse went silent. The investigation also included interviews with the families of the missing keepers. These conversations provided insights into the men's character, their experience with lighthouse work, and their state of mind during their most recent shore leave. Family members consistently described the missing keepers as experienced professionals who took their responsibilities seriously and were looking forward to completing their current assignment and returning home for extended leave. The official investigation conducted by Superintendent Muirhead and his team lasted several weeks and included examination of every conceivable explanation for the disappearance. The investigators considered mechanical accidents, medical emergencies, psychological breakdown, criminal activity, and various natural disasters as possible causes. Each theory was evaluated systematically against the available evidence, and each was found to have serious weaknesses that made it an unsatisfactory explanation for the known facts. The theory that eventually became the official explanation was that the three keepers had been swept away by an unusually large wave while conducting routine maintenance work on the western side of the island. This explanation was based primarily on the storm damage found in that area and the assumption that all three men must have been outside the lighthouse. When they disappeared, the investigators reasoned that the keepers might have gone outside to secure equipment or assess damage from recent storms, only to be caught by a rogue wave of extraordinary size and power. The Board of Trade's final report, filed in early 1901, concluded that the three keepers had been victims of what modern meteorologists would call a rogue wave or freak wave, an oceanic phenomenon that can generate waves far larger than the surrounding sea state would suggest possible. Such waves, while rare, are capable of reaching heights that can threaten structures and people well above normal sea level. The report suggested that the keepers had been conducting routine external maintenance when they were surprised by such a wave and swept into the sea. However, this official explanation failed to satisfy many of those familiar with lighthouse operations and the character of the missing men. Experienced lighthouse keepers like Ducat Marshall and MacArthur would never have risked external maintenance work during dangerous weather conditions. Their years of experience had taught them to respect the power of the Atlantic Ocean and to take every precaution when working outside during rough weather. Moreover, their heavy weather gear remained in the lighthouse, suggesting they had not prepared for outdoor work in hazardous conditions. The absence of any distress signals also troubled critics of the official explanation. Lighthouse keepers were trained to use various emergency signaling methods to summon help when facing life-threatening situations. Signal rockets, lamp signals, and emergency horns were all available to the Flannan Isles keepers, yet none had been used. If the men had been aware of approaching danger, they would certainly have attempted to signal for help before venturing outside into conditions that threatened their safety. Alternative theories began circulating almost immediately after the official report was published. Some suggested that the keepers had been murdered by criminals using the remote island as a base for illegal activities. The Flannan Isles were isolated enough that smugglers, wreckers, or other lawbreakers might have operated in the area without detection. However, no evidence supported this theory, and the lighthouse's remote location made it an unlikely target for casual criminals who would have easier opportunities elsewhere. The theory of criminal activity gained some credibility from the complete absence of the keepers. If the men had been swept away by a wave, some trace of them might reasonably have been expected to wash ashore eventually. Bodies, clothing, or personal effects might have been recovered from the sea or found along the coastlines of neighboring islands. The fact that no such evidence ever appeared suggested to some that the men might have been deliberately disposed of by parties with reason to conceal their crime. Another theory proposed that the keepers had been driven to madness by the isolation and psychological pressures of their posting. Lighthouse keeping at remote stations was known to be mentally demanding work, and the Flannan Isles represented one of the most isolated and psychologically challenging assignments in the lighthouse service. Proponents of this theory suggested that one or more of the keepers might have experienced a psychological breakdown that led to violence against his colleagues or group suicide. However, the psychological breakdown theory was contradicted by the keepers' final log entries, which showed no signs of mental distress or abnormal behavior. The men's writing appeared normal, their observations were accurate and detailed, and their routine duties had been performed conscientiously right up until their disappearance. Moreover, the The living quarters showed no evidence of violence, struggle, or the kind of disruption that might be expected if the men had been engaged in conflict with each other. A more exotic theory suggested that foreign agents had kidnapped the keepers as part of an espionage operation directed against British maritime infrastructure. The year 1900 was a period of increasing international tension, and lighthouses were certainly strategic assets that could be valuable to hostile powers seeking to disrupt British shipping or gather intelligence about maritime traffic patterns. However, the remote location and limited strategic value of the Flannan Isles made this explanation seem implausible to most investigators. The espionage theory gained some support from the mysterious circumstances of the disappearance and the complete absence of physical evidence. Professional agents might have had the expertise to remove the keepers without leaving traces that would reveal their methods or identity. However, no evidence of foreign activity in the area was ever discovered, and no intelligence services claimed credit for or showed knowledge of any operation against British lighthouse installations. The most persistent and emotionally compelling alternative theories involved supernatural explanations. Local folklore had long regarded the Flannan Isles as haunted or cursed places, inhabited by spirits that resented human intrusion into their ancient domain. Some traditions spoke of the islands as a place where the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead was unusually thin, allowing supernatural forces to interfere with human activities. These supernatural theories gained credibility from several factors that made the disappearance seem to defy rational explanation. The complete absence of physical evidence was unprecedented in maritime accident investigations. The apparent impossibility of 3 grown men vanishing from a small island, with nowhere to hide, challenged conventional understanding of cause and effect. Most significantly, the mysterious nature of the disappearance resonated with deep-seated human fears about the unknown and unexplainable. Local traditions spoke specifically of spirits that guarded the Flannan Isles against human settlement or exploitation. According to these beliefs, the construction of the lighthouse had violated ancient taboos and disturbed forces that demanded retribution. The disappearance of the 3 keepers was interpreted by some as evidence that these supernatural guardians had finally claimed their revenge against those who had dared to establish permanent human presence on the sacred islands. The supernatural interpretation was supported by reports from subsequent lighthouse keepers who claimed to experience unusual phenomena at the Flannan Isles station. Several reported hearing voices calling their names when no other person was present, seeing figures moving in areas where no one should have been, and experiencing equipment failures that seemed to occur without mechanical cause. While most of these accounts were probably products of imagination influenced by knowledge of the famous disappearance, they contributed to the growing legends surrounding the lighthouse. One particularly persistent supernatural theory involved the idea that the 3 keepers had been transported to another dimension or alternate reality by forces beyond human understanding. This explanation, while scientifically provided a way to account for the complete absence of physical evidence, while maintaining that the men might still be alive somewhere beyond the reach of conventional search and rescue efforts. As months passed without discovery of bodies or new evidence, public fascination with the case continued to grow. Newspapers throughout Britain and beyond covered the story extensively, often adding speculative details that had no basis in the official investigation. The tale of the vanished lighthouse keepers became a staple of popular journalism, with each retelling adding new elements to what was already a sufficiently mysterious story. The case attracted the attention of writers and poets who saw in it themes that resonated with broader human concerns about isolation, duty, and the relationship between civilization and the natural world. The lighthouse keepers became symbolic figures representing humanity's struggle to maintain order and safety in the face of forces that seemed determined to overwhelm human efforts. Wilfred Wilson Gibson's poem Flannan Isle, published in 1912, remains the most famous literary treatment of the case. Gibson's dramatic interpretation, while not factually accurate in all details, captured the emotional impact of the disappearance and helped establish it as part of British cultural folklore. The poem's haunting refrain, 3 men alive on Flannan Isle, who thought on 3 men dead, became synonymous with the mystery and ensured that the story would be remembered long after the immediate circumstances were forgotten. The Northern Lighthouse Board, meanwhile, had to deal with the practical implications of the tragedy. the Flannan Isles lighthouse was too important for navigation safety to be abandoned. Regardless of the mystery surrounding the previous keeper's fate, new personnel had to be recruited and assigned to the station, though this proved more challenging than officials had anticipated. Few experienced lighthouse keepers were eager to work at a location associated with such an unexplained tragedy. The combination of extreme isolation, dangerous working conditions, and the psychological burden of serving where 3 colleagues had mysteriously vanished made the Flannan Isles posting one of the least desirable assignments in the lighthouse service. The Northern Lighthouse Board was forced to offer enhanced compensation and shortened tours lengths to attract qualified personnel. Safety procedures throughout the lighthouse system were reviewed and enhanced in response to the Flannan Isles disappearance. New protocols required that at least 1 keeper remain inside the lighthouse at all times when weather conditions were potentially dangerous. Communication schedules were tightened, with more frequent check-ins required to ensure that any problems would be detected quickly. Emergency equipment was improved, and backup systems were installed to prevent any single point of failure from compromising lighthouse operations. Enhanced training programs were developed to better prepare keepers for the psychological challenges of remote lighthouse service. The isolation and stress that had been accepted as unavoidable aspects of lighthouse work were now recognized as factors that required specific preparation and ongoing support. Regular rotations were shortened to reduce the psychological burden on individual keepers, and counseling resources were made available for those who experienced difficulties adapting to isolated conditions. Despite these practical measures, the aura of mystery that surrounded Flannan Isles could not be dispelled entirely. Every new keeper assigned to the station arrived knowing the story of their predecessor's disappearance, and this knowledge inevitably affected their experience of the posting. Some reported feeling constantly watched, as if unseen presences were monitoring their activities. Others described a persistent sense of unease that they found difficult to explain or overcome. Equipment failures at the Flannan Isles station seemed to occur with unusual frequency, though investigation always revealed conventional mechanical causes. Cliffs stopped unexpectedly, requiring frequent rewinding. Oil lamps flickered without apparent cause, necessitating constant attention to maintain proper illumination. Communication equipment experienced periodic malfunctions that temporarily isolated the lighthouse from outside contact. While none of these problems were individually significant, their cumulative effect contributed to the psychological burden of serving at the station. The lighthouse continued to operate successfully despite these challenges, fulfilling its crucial role in maritime safety throughout the early decades of the 20th century. Technological advances gradually reduced the dependence on human keepers, with automated systems taking over many of the functions that had previously required constant human attention. However, the transition to automation was slower at remote stations like Flannan Isles, where the harsh environment and isolation made maintenance of complex equipment particularly challenging. In 1971, exactly 71 years after the mysterious disappearance, the Flannan Isles lighthouse was finally converted to fully automated operation. The last human keepers departed the island, ending more than 7 decades of continuous human occupation since the original tragedy. The automation process involved careful examination of every part of the lighthouse structure, but no new clues about the 1900 disappearance were discovered despite thorough investigation of areas that had not been accessible during previous searches. The departure of the last keepers marked the end of an era in lighthouse operations, but it also represented a form of closure for a story that had remained unresolved for 7 decades. The lighthouse would continue to serve mariners navigating the dangerous waters around the Flannan Isles, but it would do so without the human presence that had been maintained continuously since the station's establishment. Modern technology has brought new tools to the investigation of historical mysteries like the Flannan Isles disappearance. Underwater survey equipment can now explore the seabed around the island with unprecedented precision, searching for evidence that might have been missed by earlier investigations. Advanced computer modeling can simulate weather patterns and wave behavior with accuracy that was impossible in 1900, potentially providing new insights into the conditions that existed during the critical period. However, these technological advances have yet to produce definitive answers about what happened to James Duke, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur on that December day in 1900. The sea around Flannan Isles has proven too deep and turbulent for effective underwater searching, even with modern equipment. Computer models of historical weather patterns have confirmed that extreme wave events were possible during the critical period, but they have also shown that such events would have been highly localized and might not have been detected by distant observers. Recent research has focused on understanding the psychology of lighthouse keeping and the various factors that might have influenced the behavior of the three missing men. Studies of isolation, psychology, group dynamics under stress, and decision-making in extreme environments have provided new perspectives on the case, though they have not produced conclusive explanations for the disappearance. Some modern researchers have suggested that the keepers might have attempted a rescue operation that went tragically wrong. If they had observed a ship in distress, or survivors in the water, their training and natural instincts would have compelled them to attempt assistance, despite dangerous conditions. This theory would explain why all three men left the lighthouse simultaneously, and why no distress signals were sent. If they believed they were responding to an emergency rather than facing one themselves. The rescue theory is supported by the character and training of the missing keepers, who were known for their dedication to maritime safety and their willingness to take personal risks to save lives. However, no evidence of ships in distress or maritime accidents in the area during the critical period has ever been found, making this explanation speculative rather than conclusive. Another modern theory suggests that the keepers may have discovered evidence of illegal activity and been killed to prevent them from reporting what they had seen. The remote location of the Flannan Isles would have made them attractive to smugglers, pirates, or other criminals seeking a secure base for their operations. The lighthouse keeper's duty to report unusual activities would have made them dangerous witnesses to such crimes. This criminal theory gains some support from the complete absence of physical evidence and the apparent professional nature of the disappearance. However, no historical evidence of criminal activity in the area has been discovered, and the logistics of removing three men and all traces of their fate would have required resources and expertise that seem unlikely to have been available to casual criminals operating in 1900. The most scientifically credible explanation remains the theory that the keepers were victims of an extreme wave event that caught them outside the lighthouse during what appeared to be improving weather conditions. Modern understanding of rogue waves and extreme maritime weather has confirmed that such events are possible and could account for both the storm damage found on the island and the complete disappearance of the three men. Computer modeling of wave behavior around the Flannan Isles has shown that under specific combinations of wind, tide, and underwater topography, waves could potentially reach heights sufficient to threaten people working on the island's western cliffs. Such waves would be extremely rare but not impossible, particularly during the winter months when the North Atlantic generates its most violent weather systems. The wave theory is consistent with the physical evidence found by investigators and provides a rational explanation for the disappearance that does not require invoking criminal activity or supernatural forces. However, it still leaves troubling questions unanswered about why experienced keepers would have risked outdoor work during potentially dangerous conditions and why they failed to use available emergency signaling equipment. Perhaps the most honest assessment is that the Flannan Isles mystery will never be solved completely. Too much time has passed, too much evidence has been lost to the sea, and too many crucial details remain unknowable despite more than a century of investigation and speculation. The disappearance of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur stands as one of those historical events that resist definitive explanation, reminding us that some human stories remain forever beyond our complete understanding. Yet the enduring fascination with the case suggests that its value extends beyond the simple question of what happened to three lighthouse keepers in December 1900. The story has become a powerful symbol of humanity's relationship with the natural world, our vulnerability in the face of forces beyond our control, and our persistent need to find meaning in events that seem to defy explanation. The Flannan Isles lighthouse continues to operate today, its automated beacon flashing the same distinctive pattern that guided ships when Ducat, Marshall and MacArthur maintained their vigilant watch. The light serves as a memorial to their dedication and a reminder of the courage required by those who accepted dangerous and isolated postings to protect the lives of others. The cultural legacy of the Flannan Isles mystery extends far beyond its immediate historical significance. The story has inspired countless works of fiction, poetry, and artistic interpretation, each adding new layers to the legend while keeping alive the memory of three men who disappeared while serving an essential, dangerous occupation. Documentary filmmakers, Mystery writers and paranormal investigators continue to find new angles and interpretations that speak to contemporary audiences fascinated by unexplained phenomena and historical mysteries. Educational programs at maritime museums throughout the world use the Flannan Isles case to illustrate the challenges faced by lighthouse keepers and the evolution of maritime safety technology. The story serves as a powerful reminder of the risks accepted by those who maintained navigation aids in an era before modern communication systems, GPS technology, and sophisticated rescue capabilities. It humanizes the history of maritime safety by focusing on individual experiences rather than abstract technological progress. Modern lighthouse preservation efforts often reference the Flannan Isles story as an example of the human costs associated with maritime safety infrastructure. The automated lighthouse that now serves mariners in the area represents not just technological advancement, but also elimination of the human risks that claimed the lives of Ducat Marshall and Macabre. Their sacrifice, whether to natural forces or unknown circumstances, contributed to the eventual development of safer and more reliable navigation systems. The psychological impact of the mystery continues to resonate with people who work in isolated or dangerous occupations. The story speaks to universal fears about the vulnerability of human beings when removed from the safety and support of larger communities. It reminds us that even experienced professionals can face circumstances beyond their control or preparation, and that courage and competence do not guarantee safety in environments where nature or human malice can overwhelm individual efforts. For the families and descendants of the missing lighthouse keepers, the lack of closure has been a burden carried across multiple generations. Without bodies to bury or definitive knowledge of their ancestors' fate, they have been left to construct their own understanding of events that remain fundamentally unknowable. Some have found solace in the various theories that suggest the men died heroically while attempting to save others or protect their lighthouse. Others have focused on preserving the memory of their ancestors' service and dedication rather than seeking answers to questions that may be ultimately unanswerable. The Northern Lighthouse Board's historical records, now preserved in Scottish archives, provide a detailed administrative perspective on the incident and its long-term impact on lighthouse operations. These documents reveal how the organization struggled to balance public safety requirements, operational necessity, and respect for the missing men and their families. They also demonstrate how the tragedy influenced the development of safety protocols and technological improvements that reduced the risks faced by subsequent generations of lighthouse personnel. The Flannan Isles case has become a touchstone for discussions about the limits of human knowledge and the persistence of mystery in an age of scientific rationalism. Despite more than a century of investigation using increasingly sophisticated tools and techniques, the fundamental questions about what happened to the three keepers remain unanswered. This persistence of mystery challenges contemporary assumptions about the ability of science and technology to provide explanations for all human experiences. As we reach the end of our investigation into this enduring mystery, we must acknowledge that some questions transcend the reach of even our most determined efforts to find answers. The fate of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur remains locked in the past, beyond the reach of historical research, forensic science, or technological innovation. Their disappearance stands as one of maritime history's most compelling unsolved cases, a reminder that human stories can sometimes exceed our capacity for complete understanding. Yet their story serves purposes that extend far beyond the simple resolution of a historical mystery. It preserves the memory of men who dedicated their lives to protecting others, honoring their service while acknowledging the risks they accepted in pursuit of that service. It reminds us of the courage required by those who worked in isolation and danger to maintain the systems that made safe navigation possible for countless others. The beacon at Flannan Isles continues to flash its distinctive pattern across the North Atlantic, automated now but still serving the same essential function that brought Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur to their remote posting in December 1900. Their individual lights may have been extinguished, but the purpose they served burns on, a testament to the enduring importance of the work they died performing. And so another chronicle is preserved from the ashes of time. The mystery of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers may never be fully solved, but their story will never be forgotten, not as long as we keep the flame alive. Thank you for joining me on this investigation, Flame Keepers. If this chronicle moved you, please light up that like button and share it with fellow seekers of truth. Your engagement keeps these forgotten stories burning bright, ensuring that the memories of those who came before us continue to illuminate the present. Next Tuesday, we'll uncover Chronicle number 2, The Burning Archive, where we'll investigate the suspicious fire that destroyed crucial evidence in one of America's most controversial cases. We'll examine how important historical documents can disappear under mysterious circumstances, and what those disappearances might reveal about powerful forces trying to control the narrative of history. Until then, remember that some stories are too important to let die. This has been the Ember Chronicles. Keep the flame alive.